"Sir, put your hands where I can see them." The sharp command sliced through the humid night air. Officer Jake Reynolds tightened his grip on his service weapon, his heartbeat steady but alert. The man standing in front of him was tall, dressed in a simple black hoodie and jeans, his hands raised just slightly. Just enough to show he wasn't holding a weapon, but not enough to be fully compliant. The street was dimly lit, the flickering neon sign from a nearby bar casting eerie red and blue glows on the pavement. It wasn't unusual for Jake to patrol this part of the city. Lots of crime, lots of suspicious characters. But this man, there was something about him that made Jake uneasy. "Turn around, hands behind your head," Jake ordered, stepping forward cautiously. The man didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and said, "Officer, do you even know who I am?" Jake's jaw clenched. He'd dealt with this type before, people who thought they were above the law, people who believed dropping a name would get them out of trouble. "Doesn't matter who you are," Jake shot back. "Turn around or I will be forced to—" Before he could finish, the man smirked and placed his hands behind his back. "All right, officer. Do what you have to do." Jake cuffed him swiftly, pressing him against the hood of his squad car. As he reached for his radio, the man spoke again. "You're making a mistake." Jake ignored him and called it in. "Dispatch, I have a suspect in custody. No ID, refusing to cooperate. Bringing him in." A crackling response came through. "Copy that, Officer Reynolds. Stand by." But before Jake could get back in the car, his radio buzzed again. "Officer Reynolds, did you say no ID?" "Affirmative," Jake responded. There was a pause. Then, in a slightly panicked voice, dispatch replied, "Bring him in now. And don't, I repeat, do not do anything else. Just bring him in." Jake frowned. "What's going on?" The man in cuffs let out a low chuckle. "I told you, officer, you're making a mistake." Jake had no idea how right he was. Jake drove in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The man in the back seat sat calmly, almost too calmly for someone who had just been arrested. Every so often, Jake glanced at him through the rearview mirror. He wasn't acting like a criminal. No pleading, no anger, no fear. Just that unsettling smirk, as if he was enjoying the whole thing. When they pulled into the station, Jake yanked the door open and guided him inside. As they stepped through the entrance, something strange happened. The moment they walked in, every officer in the room turned to stare. Conversations halted. Officers at their desks froze mid-task. A few exchanged wide-eyed looks. Even Sergeant Harris, a no-nonsense officer who had been in the force for 20 years, went pale. Jake frowned. What the hell was going on? Before he could ask, a voice thundered from across the room. "What the hell did you do?" The crowd parted, and Chief Daniel Carter stormed forward, his face red with fury. Jake had never seen the chief lose his temper like this. Carter was known for his calm, collected demeanor, a man who never raised his voice unless absolutely necessary. But now, he looked ready to explode. Jake straightened. "Sir, Carter shoved past him, eyes locked onto the suspect. And then, to Jake's absolute shock, the chief grabbed the suspect's face with both hands. "Are you all right?" Carter asked, voice trembling. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Why was the police chief looking at a suspect like that? Then came the moment that made his stomach drop. The man he had just arrested smirked and said, "Relax, Danny. Your officers are just doing their job." "Danny?" Jake's breath caught in his throat. He looked between the chief and the man in cuffs, his brain scrambling for answers. Then, realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. No, it couldn't be. But the words that came next shattered any doubt. Chief Carter turned to Jake, his voice low and deadly. "Uncuff my brother. Right now." Jake's hands went cold. His mind screamed at him to move, to do something, but for the first time in his career, he was frozen. Chief Carter's brother? Slowly he reached for the handcuffs, his fingers trembling as he unlocked them. The moment the cuffs clicked open, Carter's brother rubbed his wrists, flashing that damn smirk again. Jake's heart pounded as he stepped back, feeling the weight of every single pair of eyes in the station burning into him. "Sir, Jake started, but the chief cut him off with a sharp glare. "Inside, my office, now." Jake swallowed hard. He didn't need to be told twice. Inside Chief Carter's office. The door slammed shut behind them. Jake stood stiffly, his palms damp, as Chief Carter paced behind his desk. "You want to tell me what the hell you were thinking?" Carter snapped, his voice dangerously low. Jake cleared his throat, trying to keep his composure. "Sir, I was patrolling the east side. He was acting suspiciously, dressed in dark clothes, no ID. I followed protocol." "Protocol?" Carter scoffed. "You arrested a man for walking?" "He wouldn't identify himself." Jake shot back. Carter let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. "You didn't even recognize him, did you?" Jake clenched his jaw. "No, sir." Carter exhaled sharply, then turned toward the door. "Come in," he called out. The door opened, and Carter's brother stepped inside, still looking as calm as ever. "Let me formally introduce you," the chief said, his voice edged with frustration. "This is Marcus Carter, my younger brother, former Army intelligence officer, currently working with federal agencies on high-level security operations, and you, Officer Reynolds, just arrested him in the middle of an undercover assignment." Jake's stomach dropped. "Undercover?" Marcus leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "Not a bad takedown, though," he said with a smirk. "Fast, efficient. A little too aggressive, but hey, I get it." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had just arrested the police chief's brother, who was also a federal agent, during an undercover operation. His career might be over. Carter's voice was ice cold. "Give me one good reason I shouldn't have your badge on my desk right now." Jake took a shaky breath. He had to think fast. Jake forced himself to take a steadying breath. He had to be careful. One wrong word, and his career would be over. "Sir," he began, keeping his voice firm. "I was following my training." He was dressed in all black, avoiding cameras and walking in an area known for break-ins. When I asked for ID, he refused. What was I supposed to do? Just let him go? Chief Carter's jaw tightened. "I get it." Jake continued quickly. "I made a mistake. I didn't recognize him. But I wasn't reckless. I followed every procedure, and I treated him the same way I would have treated anyone else in that situation." Silence filled the office. Carter folded his arms. "You treated him the same way?" Jake nodded. Marcus let out a low chuckle. "I believe that," he said, rubbing his wrist where the cuffs had been. "You're a tough cop, Officer Reynolds. Annoying, but thorough." Jake wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult. Carter still looked furious, but some of the tension in his shoulders eased. "You should have called it in the moment he resisted giving ID," he said. "You had a radio, didn't you?" Jake clenched his fists. That was the one thing he had no excuse for. "Yes, sir." Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're lucky my brother doesn't want to file a complaint." Jake exhaled, his entire body sagging with relief. "But," Carter continued, his tone sharp again, "you're not off the hook. I'll be putting a note in your file and you're on probation for the next month. Step out of line again and you're gone. Understood?" Jake snapped to attention. "Yes, sir." "Good." Carter leaned against his desk. "Now get out. I have more important things to deal with." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He turned and left the office, closing the door behind him. But as he walked through the station, something gnawed at him. Why had Marcus been undercover in the first place? Something about this didn't sit right. And deep down, Jake had a feeling this was far from over. As Jake stepped out of the office, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why was Marcus Carter undercover in their city? Federal agents didn't just roam around unless there was a serious threat. His instincts told him to leave it alone. He was already on thin ice with Chief Carter. But something about Marcus's smirk before he left felt like a silent dare. Jake made his way to his desk and logged into the department's database. He hesitated for a second before typing in a search. Recent crimes in the East Side District. A list of reports popped up. Most were petty crimes. Car break-ins, muggings, vandalism. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, at the bottom of the list, he spotted something strange. Missing persons. 5 names. All gone within the last 2 months. No clear connections, different ages, races, and jobs. But all of them were last seen near the same area where he arrested Marcus. Jake frowned. This wasn't a coincidence. Just then, a voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Getting into trouble again, Reynolds? He turned to see Marcus leaning against his desk, arms crossed, watching him with an amused expression. Jake quickly closed the search window. What do you want? Marcus smirked. You arrested me, remember? Thought I'd return the favor by letting you in on a little secret. He leaned in closer. You were right about one thing. I was up to something last night. But it wasn't a simple undercover gig. Jake narrowed his eyes. Then what was it? Marcus's smile faded. There's a human trafficking ring operating in this city, and I think some of your fellow officers are involved. Jake's blood ran cold. Corrupt cops? In his own department? Marcus straightened. I need someone on the inside I can trust. And lucky for you, you're already on probation. No one will suspect you. Jake hesitated. If he helped Marcus, he'd be going against his own department. But if he didn't, how many more people would disappear? Marcus watched him carefully. So, Officer Reynolds, are you in? Jake clenched his jaw. He had no choice. I'm in. Jake exhaled slowly, his mind racing. If there were dirty cops in his department, he couldn't trust anyone. If he was caught snooping, he wouldn't just lose his badge, he could end up buried 6 feet under. All right, Jake muttered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. But we do this my way. If there are cops involved, they already have eyes on you. We can't risk blowing your cover. Marcus nodded, his expression turning serious. Agreed. But that means you're the one who's going to have to do the digging. Jake clenched his fists. This was a dangerous game. One wrong move, and he'd be the next missing person on that list. Marcus handed him a folded piece of paper. Start here. These are the names of the officers I suspect. Jake hesitated before opening it. But when he did, his stomach twisted into knots. 3 of the names were men he worked with every single day. One of them, Officer Grant, was his own mentor, the guy who had trained him when he first joined the force. Jake swallowed hard. This just got personal. You okay? Marcus asked, watching his reaction. Jake forced himself to nod. Yeah, just trying to figure out how to not get killed in the next 24 hours. Marcus smirked. That's the spirit. Now, let's get to work. Jake knew he had to be careful. If these officers were dirty, then snooping around too obviously could get him killed. He needed to be smart. We start with Grant, Jake said, his voice low. I've worked with him for years. If he's involved, I need to know how deep this goes. Marcus nodded. Good, but you can't just follow him around like some rookie tailing a suspect. These guys are trained. If they catch you watching them, it's over. Jake ran a hand through his hair. He knew Marcus was right. If Grant was dirty, he wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who got in his way. I'll start by checking his patrol logs. Jake said. "See where he's been spending his shifts. If there's a pattern, it might tell us where they're running their operation." Marcus smirked. "Now you're thinking like an investigator." That night, after most of the station had cleared out, Jake made his move. He waited until the last officer left the records room before slipping inside. His heart pounded as he typed Grant's badge number into the system. A list of patrols popped up. At first, nothing seemed unusual: routine calls, traffic stops, bar fights. But then a pattern emerged. Every Tuesday and Friday night, Grant spent at least 2 hours in an abandoned warehouse on the east side of town. Jake frowned. The warehouse wasn't on any official call logs. There were no arrests, no reports, nothing. So why was Grant going there so often? "This has to be it," Jake muttered under his breath. Just then, a shadow moved outside the door. Jake's breath caught. Someone was coming. He quickly logged out and stepped away from the computer just as the door swung open. Officer Grant stood in the doorway, his cold blue eyes locking onto Jake's. "What are you doing in here, Reynolds?" Jake forced a casual smirk. "Just finishing up paperwork. You know how it is." Grant didn't move. He studied Jake for a long moment before finally nodding. "Right. Just make sure you don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong." Jake's stomach tightened. That wasn't a warning. That was a threat. Jake knew one thing for sure. He couldn't go into that warehouse alone. If Grant was dirty, there was no telling how many others were involved. Walking in blind was suicide. That night, he met Marcus in a quiet parking lot a few blocks away from the warehouse. Marcus leaned against his black SUV, arms crossed. "So, you're finally using your brain and calling for backup?" Jake rolled his eyes. "I figured having a federal agent on my side might keep me from getting killed." Marcus smirked. "Smart choice. Now tell me what you found." Jake pulled out his phone and showed him Grant's patrol logs. Every Tuesday and Friday he spends at least 2 hours here. He pointed to the warehouse on the map. No calls, no reports, nothing official. Marcus studied the screen, his expression darkening. "That's bad news. Whatever's going on in there, they don't want it on record." Jake nodded. "Exactly. Which is why we need to see it for ourselves." Marcus exhaled sharply. "All right, but we do this my way. No rushing in, no hero moves. We watch, gather intel, and get out." Jake grinned. "What, you don't think I can handle myself?" Marcus gave him a look. "I think you have a bad habit of jumping into fires without checking how hot they are." Jake chuckled. "Fair enough. Let's go." The area was eerily quiet as Jake and Marcus crouched behind a stack of abandoned shipping crates. The warehouse loomed ahead, dimly lit by a few flickering floodlights. Jake scanned the surroundings. A black SUV was parked near the entrance, and 2 men stood outside, one smoking a cigarette, the other talking on a radio. Marcus nudged him. "Recognize them?" Jake nodded grimly. "Yeah. Officer Tanner and Officer Briggs." Marcus cursed under his breath. "2 more dirty cops. This is bigger than I thought." Jake's pulse quickened. If 3 officers were involved, who else in the department was in on it? Suddenly, the warehouse door creaked open, and Grant stepped out. Jake held his breath as Grant spoke to Tanner and Briggs in a low voice. Then a chilling sound came from inside the warehouse, a muffled scream. Jake's blood ran cold. Someone was inside, someone in trouble. Marcus grabbed his arm. "Stay put. We need to know what we're dealing with." Jake clenched his fists, every instinct screaming at him to move. He couldn't just stand here while someone was being hurt. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. Someone was inside that warehouse, someone in danger. Every instinct told him to act, but Marcus's grip on his arm tightened. "Think before you move," Marcus whispered harshly. "If we rush in without a plan, we'll end up just like them." Jake clenched his jaw. He knew Marcus was right. Charging in blind could get them both killed, but at the same time, if they waited too long, the hostage might not survive. He took a deep breath. Fine, but we can't just sit here. We need a way inside, quietly. Marcus nodded. I saw a side entrance near the loading dock. Fewer guards. We get in, assess the situation, and take action if necessary. Jake exhaled sharply. All right, let's move. Inside the warehouse. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of oil and rust. Rows of crates lined the walls, creating dark shadows that provided cover as Jake and Marcus slipped inside. Voices echoed through the vast space. We should just get rid of him now, one man said. Jake peeked around a crate. In the center of the warehouse, a man was tied to a chair, blood running down his face. Grant stood in front of him, his expression cold. Not yet. We need to know who he's been talking to first. Jake's fists tightened. Who was this guy? What did he know? Then the hostage lifted his head, revealing a bruised but defiant face. Jake's breath caught. It was Detective Harris, the chief's right-hand man. Marcus cursed under his breath. They're torturing one of their own. Jake's pulse raced. Harris had a reputation for being honest, for never taking bribes. He must have gotten too close to the truth. Grant grabbed Harris by the collar. Last chance. Who else knows? Harris spit blood onto Grant's shoes. Go to hell. Grant sighed. Have it your way. He pulled out his gun and pressed it to Harris's head. Jake and Marcus exchanged a look. They had to act. Now. Jake didn't hesitate. There was no time for distractions. Harris's life was hanging by a thread. He glanced at Marcus. We go in fast, take them by surprise. Marcus gave a tight nod. On my mark. They moved like shadows, creeping closer. Grant cocked his gun, pressing it harder against Harris's temple. Last chance? Grant sneered. Harris gave a bloody smirk. You're gonna regret this. Bang! The shot rang out, but it wasn't Grant's. Marcus had fired first, his silenced weapon taking down the closest dirty cop, Officer Briggs, before he even had time to react. Move! Marcus shouted. Jake lunged forward, tackling Grant before he could pull the trigger. The gun flew from his hand, skidding across the floor. Officer Tanner spun around, reaching for his weapon, too slow. Marcus put him down with a clean shot to the leg. Grant fought like an animal, swinging wildly at Jake. But Jake had years of training. A hard right hook sent Grant crashing to the ground. Panting, Jake grabbed Grant by the collar. It's over, you're done. Grant spat blood. You think this stops anything? You have no idea how deep this goes. Jake's stomach turned. How many more were involved? How far up did this corruption reach? Harris groaned, still tied to the chair. Little help here. Jake and Marcus quickly untied him. Harris rubbed his sore wrists, giving them a nod of thanks. Took you long enough? Suddenly, sirens. Jake's head snapped toward the entrance. Red and blue lights flashed through the warehouse windows. Marcus cursed. We need to move. Harris shook his head. Number this is good. The chief's on his way. Jake felt a pit form in his stomach. What if the chief was part of this too? The screech of tires echoed outside the warehouse as patrol cars skidded to a stop. Doors slammed. The sound of hurried footsteps filled the air. Jake's grip tightened around Grant's collar. Was this their rescue, or an even bigger trap? Then a deep, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. Everyone stand down. The officers hesitated. Chief Donovan had arrived. The tall, grizzled police chief stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the room. His gaze landed on Harris, bruised but alive. Then he looked at Jake and Marcus, their weapons still drawn. What the hell is going on here? The chief demanded. Harris stepped forward, wiping the blood from his mouth. Sir, these men saved my life." Chief Donovan's expression darkened as he spotted Grant still pinned beneath Jake. His jaw clenched. "You?" he growled. Grant smirked. "Ah, Chief. Glad you could make it." The chief stepped closer, looming over Grant. "I told you the department doesn't protect scum like you." Grant scoffed. "Then why did half your men look the other way?" A heavy silence filled the warehouse. The other officers shifted uncomfortably. Jake's heart pounded. Was Donovan really clean, or was this just a show? Then, the chief did something unexpected. He pulled out his gun and aimed it at his own men. "If any officer here knew about this operation and did nothing," Donovan said coldly, "turn in your badge. Now." No one moved. The tension was suffocating. Then, slowly, 2 officers unhooked their badges and dropped them to the ground. Jake exhaled. Donovan wasn't dirty, he was furious. "Arrest them," the chief ordered, pointing at Grant and the other corrupt officers. The remaining officers hesitated, then obeyed. As Grant was cuffed, he sneered at Jake. "You think this ends with me?" Jake met his gaze with steel. "I hope not. I'm just getting started." As Grant and his men were hauled away, the tension in the warehouse lingered like a storm cloud. Chief Donovan pinched the bridge of his nose. "This mess isn't over. We need to get statements, evidence." Marcus cut in. "We already found something." Jake pulled out the flash drive he had taken from Grant's pocket. It was the one thing Grant had fought hardest to keep. The chief frowned. "What's on it?" Jake shook his head. "We don't know yet, but Grant was willing to die before letting us have it. That means it's big." The chief sighed. "Let's get somewhere secure and take a look." An hour later, in the chief's private office, the tension was thick as Marcus plugged the flash drive into a laptop. A single encrypted file appeared. Harris, still nursing his injuries, leaned forward. "Can you crack it?" Marcus smirked. "Please." Within minutes, he bypassed the security. The file opened, revealing a series of financial records, transaction logs, and names. Lots of names. Jake's blood ran cold as he read the list. These weren't just dirty cops. They were politicians, business moguls, even judges. Then, one name stopped them cold. Chief Donovan's eyes widened. His own deputy commissioner was on the list. The chief's jaw tightened. "Number it can't be." Jake's gut twisted. "This goes all the way to the top, doesn't it?" Donovan's face darkened. "We've got a war on our hands." Marcus exhaled. "Then let's make sure we win." Chief Donovan's hands clenched into fists. The betrayal was a hard pill to swallow, but he was a man of action. "We can't trust the department," he said finally. "If the deputy commissioner is involved, that means every move we make could be leaked." Jake nodded. "Then we need to move fast before they come for us first." Marcus was already at the computer, transferring the data to a secure drive. "I can back this up, but we need to go public. If we sit on this, they'll bury it, or bury us." A heavy silence followed. They had the truth, but the enemy had the power. Then a sudden buzz from Harris's phone shattered the quiet. He glanced at the screen. His face paled. They already know. He turned the screen to show them, a text message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed out of it. You won't live to regret this." Before anyone could react, boom! The entire building shook. An explosion rocked the lower floors of the police station. The lights flickered. Sirens blared. Smoke curled under the door. Marcus cursed. "They're here!" Jake pulled his gun. "We need to move, now." Donovan grabbed his service weapon. "Follow me. There's a way out through the evidence room." They bolted out of the office. Officers ran in chaos, some trying to evacuate, others shouting into radios. But something was wrong. Jake saw them first, men in tactical gear, pushing through the smoke, guns raised. They weren't cops. They sent mercenaries. Marcus growled. Harris checked his ammo. Good, I was hoping for a real fight. It was war, and they weren't going down without one. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks echoing through the smoke-filled hallways. The mercenaries weren't here to arrest anyone, they were here to kill. Chief Donovan led the way, weaving through the chaos, his gun raised. Stay close, the evidence room is this way. Jake and Marcus flanked Harris, covering his six as they moved. The flashing emergency lights painted the scene in eerie red and blue, making it hard to see how many hostiles were in play. Then, a burst of bullets shattered the glass windows above them. Jake dove for cover, dragging Harris down just as a bullet grazed his shoulder. He gritted his teeth through the pain. Marcus popped up from behind an overturned desk and fired back. One mercenary went down, another staggered but kept coming. They're too well trained. Harris shouted. We need an exit, now. Donovan pointed to a maintenance hatch near the evidence room. That leads to the underground parking lot. It's our best shot. Marcus kicked open the hatch, revealing a dark stairwell. But as they started down, a deep, chilling voice echoed through the smoke. Chief Donovan. The voice called mockingly. You should have stayed in line. Jake's gut twisted. He knew that voice. Deputy Commissioner Robert Langston stepped through the smoke, flanked by more armed men. He wore a bulletproof vest and held a silenced pistol. His smirk was cold, calculating. You made a mistake, Chief. You and your little band of heroes. Donovan's grip on his gun tightened. You're a disgrace to that badge. Langston chuckled. And you're dead men walking. Then he raised his gun and fired. The gunshot echoed through the narrow stairwell. Someone had been hit. Chief Donovan gasped as the bullet tore into his side. He staggered back, gripping the wound as blood seeped through his fingers. Chief! Jake lunged forward, catching him before he collapsed. Marcus didn't hesitate. He opened fire. The stairwell erupted into chaos as bullets flew in every direction. Langston's men ducked for cover, but Marcus and Harris weren't missing their shots. Langston cursed, retreating behind his men. Kill them all! He barked. Jake, gritting his teeth, pulled Donovan toward the maintenance door. We have to move, now! Marcus laid down cover fire as Harris kicked open the door, revealing the underground parking garage. But their problems weren't over yet. 3 black SUVs were already waiting. More men in tactical gear stood ready, weapons drawn. They had been expected. We're trapped, Marcus growled. Jake scanned the garage. They needed a car. Fast. Then he saw it. A police armored van. It was parked near the exit, keys likely still inside. Jake turned to Marcus. Can you hotwire it? Marcus grinned. Who do you think I am? The problem. They had to reach it first. Langston stepped through the doorway behind them, his gun raised. End of the road, gentlemen. Then, before he could fire, Harris made his move. He charged Langston. The 2 men crashed into the wall, struggling for control. Langston snarled, trying to push Harris away, but the older officer wasn't letting go. Go! Harris shouted. I'll hold him! Jake hesitated, but Marcus grabbed his arm. We don't have time! Move! With no choice, Jake and Marcus dragged the wounded chief towards the van. They had seconds before Langston's men opened fire again. Marcus slid into the driver's seat, yanking wires free. Jake slammed the back doors shut just as bullets ricocheted off the metal. The engine roared to life. Jake banged on the partition. Go! Marcus floored it. The van screeched out of the parking garage, smashing through the barrier and into the streets. Behind them, Harris's fate remained unknown. But Jake had a promise to keep. They weren't going down without a fight. The armored van tore through the city streets, sirens wailing in the distance. Marcus swerved through traffic, trying to put as much distance between them and Langston's men as possible. In the back, Jake pressed down hard on Chief Donovan's wound, his hands slick with blood. Stay with me, Chief. We're almost there. Donovan groaned, his breaths shallow. Langston. Won't stop. We need proof. Jake's mind raced. The evidence room had been compromised, but Donovan had mentioned something earlier, a failsafe. The external drive. Jake muttered. Where is it? Donovan weakly reached into his bulletproof vest and pulled out a small flash drive. This has everything. Langston's dirty deals, the mercenaries' contracts, even proof of his ties to the cartel. Jake's eyes widened. This was it. But before he could say another word, bam! An explosion rocked the van. Marcus lost control, the vehicle flipping onto its side and skidding across the asphalt. Sparks flew as metal screeched against concrete. Jake's head slammed against the wall, his vision blurring. He heard shouting, boots hitting the pavement. Then gunfire. Through the shattered windshield, Jake saw Langston's men closing in. This was it. They had no backup, no escape, just a handful of bullets and the truth they were dying to bury. Jake exchanged a look with Marcus, then with Donovan, who, despite the pain, nodded. They knew what had to be done. They would fight to the last breath, because some truths were worth dying for. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. The armored van lay wrecked, smoke billowing from the engine. Jake wiped blood from his forehead and reached for his gun. They had seconds before Langston's men surrounded them. Marcus groaned, pulling himself up. We're sitting ducks here. Jake peeked through the shattered windshield, 6 heavily armed men closing in. Behind them, a sleek black SUV pulled up, and Langston stepped out, a smug grin on his face. End of the line, boys. He gestured to his men. Take them alive. The chief, maybe not. Jake exchanged a glance with Marcus. No way were they going down without a fight. Crack! Jake fired first, taking down one of Langston's men. Marcus followed, unloading into another before diving for cover. Bullets ripped through the van. Donovan, still bleeding, managed to lift his weapon and fire off a shot. Go! End this! He rasped, but they were outnumbered. Langston crouched behind a car, laughing. You can't win, boy! Give me the drive, and maybe I'll let you live. Jake clenched his jaw. The flash drive. It was still in his pocket. The evidence that could destroy Langston. Marcus shouted, Jake, we gotta move now! They had one last shot at survival. Jake gritted his teeth. And then, sirens. Lots of them. Langston's smirk vanished as a fleet of police cars stormed onto the scene. Backup had arrived. Jake exhaled. Looks like you're out of time, Langston. Langston's men hesitated. Then, one by one, they dropped their weapons. But Langston wasn't done. He grabbed a hostage, a wounded officer nearby, and pressed a gun to his head. Let me walk, or he dies! He screamed. Jake's hands tightened on his gun. One shot. One chance. Langston dragged the officer backward, nearing an escape route. Then, bang! A single bullet ripped through the air. Langston collapsed. Jake lowered his gun. One shot, one clean hit. The officer stumbled away, gasping. Langston hit the pavement, clutching his shoulder, his face twisted in shock. It was over. The police swarmed in, cuffing the fallen chief. Marcus let out a breath. Damn, Jake. Remind me not to piss you off. Jake turned to Donovan, who, though weak, gave a faint smile. Told you, you were a good cop. Jake sighed, clutching the flash drive. Let's make sure this never happens again. As the sun rose over the city, Jake knew one thing. Corruption had lost today, and justice had finally won.